This is CBC Vancouver News.
By the end of the session, we expect all of it to have passed and in the changes being implemented in communities.
MLAs return to Victoria this week for the fall sitting, walking into high expectations around housing legislation. Plus,
we want them to be removed, spay and neutered, and then contained, rather than trapped and killed.
Granville Island is so overrun with rabbits, many have now been euthanized, sparking outrage from activists. And
how they are being separated from their families, from their own country where they have lived and born and grew up in.
Local voices join global calls for more humanitarian aid for the Armenian crisis, including ramped up pressure on the Canadian government. Good evening, I'm Tanya Fletcher. The leader of the Conservative Party of BC is under fire tonight over a social media post he made on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation yesterday. John Rusted's post said, "Today we remember what happens when the Canadian government thinks it's better at raising children than parents. I will always stand with parents." Now, critics say his comment appears to compare teaching students about sexual orientation and gender identity to the genocide of Indigenous children in residential schools. Rustad's post quickly drew backlash from residential school survivors and fellow MLAs who say it politicizes the deaths of children at residential schools in order to support the parental rights movement.
That was really horrific to me, knowing that the hatred has taken so much from us.
CBC News reached out to Rustad for comment, but his office said he would not be available for an interview before broadcast. With new provincial housing targets unveiled this week, Vancouver Islanders are hopeful they'll see some relief in the coming years. Our Claire Palmer is in Nanaimo hearing from advocates who say addressing missing middle housing is critical to making the future affordable.
We've made some real progress to deliver the homes.
BC's housing minister has hinted toward key pieces of legislation expected to be passed this fall, designed to add multi-unit housing for middle-income earners.
We're going to be unlocking homes, creating conditions that encourage faster delivery of homes in communities throughout this province.
In Nanaimo, advocates are calling for medium-dense housing like this: low-rise apartments, duplexes, triplexes, and walk-ups. They say that would best address the missing middle, which refers to housing options that fall between high-density living and detached houses.
These kinds of missing middle developments allow us to densify for cheaper and more gradually than building tall towers like they do in kind of Vancouver, Toronto. So you have the gradual benefit of building these smaller, more human-scale housing forms.
He adds the province's mandatory housing targets are a start, forcing municipalities to meet specific supply requirements. Local governments are also acting. Victoria recently removed red tape barriers to build more missing middle housing.
Victoria is on the right track. So it hasn't come to Nanaimo, like you said, this kind of provincial mandate, but it's expected to. And so far, council and staff are definitely on board.
We absolutely need those people in our industries. It's crucial, not just in the city of Victoria, but around the country. And so that's one of the really driving forces behind why we're trying to strip away every impediment possible from being able to build faster and better across the whole city.
For those who need it most, more options for affordable housing can't come soon enough.
It's been really difficult being in the service industry. I'm lucky enough to get some gratuities. I heard the mayor say, that he needs us as workers. Well, we need the government right now. It needs to be more of a renter's market.
The fall sitting of the BC legislature gets underway this week. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Nanaimo.
As Claire mentioned, MLAs will be back in Victoria for the start of the fall sitting on Tuesday, and the government is hopeful its proposed housing legislation will make a difference.
This fall, starting next week, you'll start seeing all the legislation that government's committed to, and by the end of the session, we expect all of it to have passed and in the changes being implemented in communities.
The province says it's on track to deliver a projected 108,000 homes completed or under active construction by the end of 2028. Well, BC's coroner and some doctors are calling on the province to bring in supervised inhalation sites. The idea is to offer a space to smoke illicit drugs to reduce overdose deaths.
The effect of an inhaled drug is just as quick, is just as intense, and it's much easier to do. So users are seeming to prefer inhalation over injection more and more as we go forward.
BC's chief coroner says nearly 2/3 of BC's overdose deaths this year came from smoking illicit drugs. Yet only 40% of supervised consumption sites in the province offer a safe place for people to smoke. Well, a husband and wife hiking in Banff National Park have been killed in a rare bear attack. It took hours for Parks Canada to reach the couple, and ultimately it was too late. As the CBC's Joe Horwood is finding out, this time of year can be particularly dangerous.
A desperate satellite SOS Friday evening, a bear attack in a remote part of Canada's oldest national park. Bad weather grounded helicopters, forcing rescuers to make the long, dark hike into the Red Deer River Valley. By the time they arrived, it was too late. 2 people were dead.
They were outdoors people who were very used to going out there, going out into the backcountry and live for getting outdoors. So it's I'm sure an incredible shock for their family, and I just really feel for them. It's a horrible situation.
Bear attacks are rare, fatalities even rarer.
We only see a couple of those, a year, and we're talking about all of North America. So it is an extremely rare thing to happen, but that doesn't really change it for the family and the victims. It's devastating.
There have been several bear encounters in recent weeks.
All right, guys, keep looking.
This video, taken last month, shows a group of hikers in the same park being followed by a pair of grizzlies for about 20 minutes before the bears disappeared into the trees. And just last week, the park's most famous grizzly, a 650-pound behemoth known as the Boss, charged at locals in the Banff town site, where he had come to raid fruit trees near a resident's home. This time of year is especially dangerous.
At this time of year, bears are trying to fatten up for the winter. So they're just feeding. They become protective of the food source. And if they feel like you're a potential threat to take that food source away, they may act in an aggressive manner.
Bears protecting their food source can be defensive. The response team in this case encountered a grizzly displaying aggressive behavior and killed it. To stay safe, the main thing is to avoid contact in the first place. Making noise while hiking, keeping an eye out for tracks or claw marks on trees, even looking for birds circling above, which could indicate a carcass is nearby. Titchener says if you see these signs, pick a different trail. If you do come face to face with a grizzly, group up, do not run away. Get the bear spray out and be ready to use it. But a defensive bear is a very different situation from being stalked by a bear. So taking the time to take a bear safety course before you go out into the backcountry could be the difference between life and death. Joe Horwood, CBC News, Lake Louise.
Well, the RCMP has announced details of a regimental funeral for Constable Rick O'Brien. He was the Ridge Meadows Mountie gunned down in the line of duty 9 days ago. O'Brien had been executing a search warrant at a home in Coquitlam when he was shot and killed. His funeral will be held this Wednesday in Langley. It'll include a procession with uniformed officers and other first responders. Thousands of people are expected to attend. CBC News will live stream the event. You can go to cbc.ca/BC for a link to the broadcast. Well, local pressures are rising as tensions continue to escalate just outside Armenia. More than 100,000 refugees have fled since Azerbaijan took full control of the territory. This weekend, the United Nations sent in a humanitarian team to provide aid. But as Janella Hamilton reports, some in BC's Armenian community say it's time for Canada to step up with more help.
A long line of vehicles fronting Armenian flags and signs that read "Stop Azerbaijan Aggression," leaving from Richmond, headed for the Vancouver Art Gallery Sunday afternoon. They want people to know about the growing conflict and urgent need for more humanitarian aid.
For the first time in human history, Armenians are no longer in control of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh.
After a long history of conflict, Azerbaijan retook control of the enclave in a military offense nearly 2 weeks ago, which reportedly killed at least 200 ethnic Armenians in 2 days of bombing. Fearing for their lives, close to 120,000 people have fled their ancestral homeland.
People have been there since the Armenian genocide, and they've seen 4 generations of war, crime, hatred, and just they're trying to survive, and now they have no hope.
Local journalists have reported displaced civilians sheltering in public buildings with no food or electricity in the region's capital. 14-year-old Aya Chapanian says it breaks her heart to think of the pain and suffering children like her are going through.
Their childhood has been taken away from them, how they are being separated from their families, from their own country where they have lived and born and grew up in.
I've been in touch with some of the children in the last couple of weeks to talk about what's been going on, and they are extremely distraught.
She says she's worried for her family members in Armenia.
Even the so-called safe regions currently, we don't know how long that's going to be for. Right now, they have a lot of power against us, military power, and they are not afraid to use it.
Also at the rally, BC's Health Minister Adrian Dix, who's standing in solidarity with the Armenian community in their demands for more diplomatic pressures.
This is something as a whole country we need to make a strong statement about. One, that it's unacceptable. 2, that we're going to support Armenia.
They are also calling on the federal government to impose economic sanctions on Azerbaijan. Until then, these protesters say the future of their home country and heritage remains uncertain. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
A silent candlelight vigil was held in Vancouver tonight to mark the annual Day of the Defenders in Ukraine.
To honor all of those who have fought for Ukraine's independence in the past, and of course all of those who are fighting right now and those who we've lost in the last year and a half.
People gathered around a display of army boots with Ukrainian and Canadian flags to honor Canadians who are fighting in Ukraine. UN officials have recorded thousands of civilian casualties in Ukraine since Russia's invasion in February of 2022. One of Vancouver's most popular tourist hotspots has become the backdrop of a growing rabbit problem. Granville Island has now euthanized many of the animals because they've been acting as an attractant to predators that strike a safety risk. As Michelle Morton reports, animal advocates staged a protest today arguing the move is inhumane and not the only option.
If you've been here lately, chances are you've seen these residents hopping around. Rabbits have become a more common sight in recent months. A spokesperson for Granville Island says when they first became aware of the bunny problem, they contacted the Rabbitats Rescue Society, but the organization didn't have capacity to take them all in. Granville Island says the growing number of rabbits drew a growing number of coyotes, sparking a safety risk for visitors and their pets. And so they've removed many of the rabbits, taking them to a licensed veterinarian to be euthanized.
These are domestic pets that have been dumped, bred.
At Sunday's rally, animal advocates insist the bunnies need to be helped, not harmed.
There's a lot of people supporting the rabbits in this area, and that we want them to be removed, spay and neutered, and then contained, rather than trapped and killed.
It's not the only Vancouver tourist spot overrun with rabbits. Just a few miles away, Jericho Beach has long been a bunny hotspot, with visitors urged to avoid them. In this case, the Rabbitats Rescue Society has said it's been in talks with Granville Island since late spring and says it told Granville Island it's better to trap the animals in the late fall and winter because they'll be easier to catch because they'll be hungrier, the population will be naturally reduced, and babies will not be left in their nests. The charity also said they requested more time to find a place for all the rabbits.
The coyotes were here anyway, and the reason there are more coyotes here now is that because of the construction just south of the end of the Burrard Bridge, it's dislodged them from their habitat. They've cut down all that bushland, so all the coyotes are moving eastward, and they're here. I'd rather let nature take its course.
Animal advocates say they want to see new bylaws brought in to limit domestic rabbit breeding, including regulations for breeders and a requirement to spay or neuter any bunnies before they're sold. Michelle Morton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, starting today, drivers are required to have winter tires for many highways in BC, including the Sea to Sky and Coquihalla. Appropriate winter tires are defined as those either with M&S, that stands for mud and snow, or have the mountain or snowflake symbol on them. Drivers caught without proper winter tires can be fined $121. Well, some of the world's best female surfers are in Tofino this weekend for the Queen of the Peak competition.
I've never seen a surf population like this where there's so many women participating in the sport at a high level as well.
The 12th annual contest attracted more than 100 competitors who are crushing barriers in the sport. Organizers say Tofino has become a hot destination for women surfers and hope to see the momentum continue. And a Richmond man has won the National Pumpkin Weigh-Off in the United States.
I was the biggest, and 58 other pumpkin growers tried, but they didn't succeed.
His pumpkin, named Mama, weighs more than 2,200 pounds. Dave Chan has been growing pumpkins for 15 years in Richmond and has been the pumpkin growing champion at multiple competitions over the years. In this one, he walked away with first place in California this weekend and nearly $20,000 US. And still ahead after the blunder in the House of Commons, Jewish groups want more details on how some who fought for Nazis entered Canada in the first place. That's coming up next. Welcome back. American lawmakers have some breathing room to solve their budget debates after yesterday's passage of a short-term spending bill narrowly missing a government shutdown. But it includes no funding for Ukraine, and it could cost the House Speaker his job. The CBC's Katie Simpson explains.
There is a calmness at the U.S. Capitol after near calamity. While the government remains open,
last night Congress passed.
Few are happy about how it all went down.
I'm sick and tired of the brinksmanship, and so are the American people.
The president signed the short-term funding agreement after a wild day, which included a Democrat pulling the fire alarm, accused of trying to delay proceedings.
With that objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
But eventually, moderate Republicans and Democrats in the House came together to approve a last-minute deal to fund the government until mid-November. An agreement that does not include additional money for Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin sits in Russia today and he looks across the landscape and he sees the United States of America, which is unwilling to spend what it needs to on defense.
The U.S. says it now has a narrow window to approve more Ukraine funding before U.S. support runs dry.
I can reassure them, look at me, we're going to get it done.
There are no guarantees from Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who controls the House with his slim, unpredictable Republican majority.
The priority for me is America and our borders. Now, I support being able to make sure Ukraine has the weapons that they need, but I firmly support the border first.
McCarthy emerges from this budget battle deeply wounded. The far-right Republicans who helped him become Speaker want to boot him out, at least in part, for working with Democrats.
I do intend to file a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy this week. I think we need to rip off the Band-Aid. I think we need to move on with new leadership that can be trustworthy.
It's a fight McCarthy says he's ready for.
So be it. Bring it on. Let's get over with it, and let's start governing.
That was the CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. Well, there are growing calls tonight for Ottawa to release a decades-old confidential report looking into the presence of Nazi war criminals in Canada. The calls reignited by that standing ovation that ousted the Speaker and forced the Prime Minister to apologize. JP Tasker has more on that.
This embarrassing moment in Parliament honoring a Nazi unit soldier.
He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero,
is prompting calls for Canada to reckon with its own history.
How did the Nazi war criminals get in, and how were they able to avoid any accountability all this time?
It's unclear how many alleged war criminals were admitted after the Second World War. One Jewish group estimates the number is in the thousands. It's Canada's dirty little secret, says the special envoy for Holocaust remembrance.
I really think at this point we need to open up the archives of history to expose the sunlight of disinfectant and arrive at the truth.
The Deschênes Commission probed the issue in the 1980s. Part of its report made public. The rest marked secret. The names of Nazi collaborators never released. As for ex-soldiers like Jaroslav Hunka, the commission said, charges of war crimes against members of the Galicia Division have never been substantiated.
When it comes to remembering the victims, we've done a lot. But when it comes to remembering the murderers, we've done very little.
David Mattis appeared before the commission decades ago. He says its findings on Ukrainian Nazi soldiers are questionable.
The Nuremberg Tribunal identified the SS as a criminal organization, and I think that has much more persuasive force.
The NDP wants the government to name names of ex-Nazis.
We absolutely need to have more transparency.
But when pressed, Canada's Attorney General wouldn't commit to opening the books.
I think there's always room to learn about instances of gross human rights violations.
Jewish groups in the opposition party say what happened in Parliament was a shameful event. The chance to re-examine history, they say, may be the silver lining. JP Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
Here's a live shot of Cambie Street with City Hall there in the background. Well, cooler conditions and some rain are on tap for many regions tomorrow. I'll have your 5-day forecast coming up next. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. CBC Vancouver is the exclusive media partner of the Jade Music Festival, October 18th to the 20th. The festival features a variety of events that showcase Chinese-Canadian music and entertainment. And on October 21st, support youth arts education with Gloria Makarenko at Splash, Arts Umbrella's 41st annual gala and art auction. Tickets at artsumbrella.com.
And let's take a look at your forecast. We'll start with kind of a bird's eye view of what was a very bluebird type day across most of the province, except for smack dab in the middle. You can see this is just through this afternoon and into this evening. Prince George really got the target of some of that precipitation, isolated showers, so quite a lot of precipitation for the central portion of the province. But for the rest of BC, we saw sunny skies, blue conditions, and here's our forecast for tomorrow. We will be a little bit cooler than average for this time of year, and yeah, a lot of that precipitation might travel south. So Monday will bring a chance of showers throughout much of BC and through the interior, the Okanagan, Vancouver as well, the south coast. But it's kind of a one-day blip for much of the province. Here's our precipitation outlook as we go right through the entire work week. You can see the south is largely spared, more rain in the north, and we'll see that reflected with the 5-day forecast for Vancouver. Again, those showers for Monday, but then we clear up, dry out, the sun returns, and we'll begin a gradual warm-up as well, even back to around 20 degrees for next weekend. And that is your late news for this Sunday, October 1st. For news anytime, anywhere, you can download the free CBC News app. You can always find us online as well at cbc.ca/BC. Thank you so much for watching this weekend. Have a great night.